Welcome back to Trading Psychology. I'm your psychology coach, Sanjeev, and this is section 2 of our course. And I have named this section Mindful Planning. So, we're going to kick off with looking at the 4 fears behind most of your mistakes. And in this section is where we really start to identify what mistakes you make and how we can break these down to start to change these patterns of thoughts or behavior. Now, generally, there are 4 fears behind most of your mistakes, and I want to unpack these briefly and I'll show you how these can actually show up in your trading. Firstly, the fear of losing money. Now, I'm sure every single one of us can relate to this on some level, as who would want to come to work, do everything to the best standard that they can, and still be in a position where they could lose money? Now, this fear can impact your trading in a number of ways, but most commonly, it's going to stop people either executing positions entirely and second guessing themselves, or maybe it'll make them move their stop loss prematurely, only to be cut out of a market before an expected move takes place. A fear of loss actually makes sense in many aspects of life. Think about losing a physical possession or maybe even a loved one. And you can understand why the fear of loss actually transfers over into our trading. But again, it is one of those human emotions which typically doesn't lead to good actions when it comes to trading. Secondly, the fear of being wrong. Again, deep down, be honest. None of us really like to be wrong. If we work hard at something and we put a lot of time and energy into it, we want to see some kind of reward from this. So on some level, most of us want to be right and we want to be rewarded from the fruits of our labor. Now, what makes this worse in trading is when you're wrong, not only does your ego take a hit, but it can often cost you money. Now, this can present itself in your trading by simply making you not execute on positions again to try and avoid the fear ever taking place. Number 3, a big one in this industry, the fear of missing out. Now, this is a big one, and all honesty, this is one I have suffered from myself. I'm not perfect. I am simply someone that has improved over a period of time. Now, this is going to be where you watch a trade, either miss your entry or you see a move taking place and your mind tells you to jump in and get involved. Typically, this is going to cause issues by getting you to either execute too early or outside of your plan maybe. Now, fundamentally, one of the reasons we all suffer from this is think about some of the common narratives which are spoken about when it comes to investing. Imagine you invested in Amazon or Apple or even Bitcoin a number of years ago. Where would you be today, as most of the adverts like to say? Ultimately, no amount of regret about the past can change your present circumstances. If these are narratives that are commonly spoken about, which they are, and I'm sure every single one of you has heard them, this is why your mind is wired to drive you into a position. It's trying to protect you from missing out on the next big trade. Finally, fear of letting a winner turn into a loser. Again, I'm sure many of you have experienced this, and again, I definitely fall into this camp. This might mean being in a good position and experiencing the rug pull. Watching this big floating profit simply disappear. This will typically lead most people to either take profits far before they have intended to, and this will naturally be detrimental, as one of the main things that you want to be able to do well as a trader is to cut your losses quickly, but also let your winners run. Now, in every scenario we have just talked about, I want you to understand that fear can drive an undesirable action in the moment. But in some cases, the frustration causes you to stray from your edge or mismanage risk, which will only go on to amplify the problem. Now, you might relate to one or more of these, and please take note of this, as these are likely to change over time, especially depending on the amount of equity that you are trading. Some of the fears may not present when dealing in trades in the hundreds, but can start to weigh heavily on you when you're dealing with trades in the thousands. Now, as you progress as a trader, you will want to remain aware of these fears and which ones are driving your decisions. And I want you to ask yourself if your decisions are being skewed by this. Well, it's good and well knowing which fears are holding us back, but how do you actually overcome these fears? Now, how you fundamentally beat these starts by firstly focusing on two areas we touched on in section 1. Firstly, a belief in your edge. The belief in your edge is going to help you beat the fear of being wrong and help you beat the fear of losing money. You need to know your edge well enough to understand that will only ever present over a large enough sample size. When you're comfortable with this idea, you understand that if you truly have an edge, then every loss simply brings you closer to the next winning trade. By truly knowing your edge, you know that you're not going to be right all the time, and importantly, you don't need to be right all the time in order to make money in the long run. This is why there is such a big push in this community to do your own backtesting. You have to be comfortable and believe in what you are doing to understand that if you stick with the system over a large enough sample size, you can see the results yourself. You will come out on top. Now, secondly, you need to believe in the uncertainty of the market because it will help you beat FOMO and fearing a winner turning into a loser. So by embracing the uncertainty of the market, you understand that opportunities will present time and time again, meaning you should never need to chase a position. By simply relying on a system to take profits from the market, you shouldn't need to worry about a winner turning into a loser, as you know over time this will pay you. Now I hope this becomes clear, and I'm sure many of you will be able to relate to one or all of these fears which drive our decisions. As a final exercise in this scenario, and yes, there are more of them in this section too, I want you to sit down and reflect on some of your bad trading habits and work out which category they fall into under these fears. You need to be able to identify which fears are driving your actions, and this is a very good exercise to do regularly as I mentioned, your habits can and will change over time. But typically, most of the mistakes that you are making are typically for one of those 4 fears that we have been through. Next, the habit loop. Now, this is going to be a big video because this is the core and one of the most important sections in this entire course. In this video, we're going to be discussing a concept called the habit loop. Now, this is designed to teach you how our habits fundamentally work, and this is both in your habitual thoughts and actions. So what I'll be doing is I'll be going through and breaking down in detail and then exploring how this works in our day-to-day lives and how we can finally apply this to our trading. The habit loop, I can promise you, will be transformational. Let's start at the very beginning though. What is a habit? So this is typically something done often and regularly, usually without thinking. Now, the reason this is important is we want to be able to mold our habitual thoughts and actions to move alignment with the markets to make us the most efficient traders possible. Now, how this works with our System 1 and System 2 mindset. So you'll recall in Section 1, we discussed that our minds have 2 modes of operation, System 1 and System 2. If you don't recall this, please go back to the last video and go back through this section. But I want you to understand that to create and break habits, it is the key for our success, because the more you can eliminate your bad habits and instill good ones, it's going to help your System 1 mind make the right decisions in the shortest amount of time. Now, I want to break down the fundamentals of this concept, and I want you to understand that absolutely every habit you have breaks down into a 4-stage process. And those 4 stages are a trigger, a craving, a habit, and the reward. Now, these 4 steps control all physical and mental routines, whether you're aware of them or not. Let me break this down and describe this further. Every routine or habit starts with a trigger. The purpose of the trigger is simply to the purpose of this trigger is simply the initial cue which gets the whole routine started. Now, after the cue has taken place, this generally leads to some kind of craving for some kind of action or reward. The craving then leads you to conduct the habit itself, and the completion of that habit gives you a reward. Let me give you a few examples to help demonstrate this. So you can see we have our 4 columns: trigger, craving, habit, and reward. So let's have a look at some of the examples in both our day-to-day lives and our trading. Let's start with brushing our teeth. This is our first habit. Now, actually, the act of brushing your teeth starts way before you put toothpaste on your toothbrush and start to get to work on your teeth. It often starts with bad breath. Most people sense that they have bad breath, and that is the initial trigger. Now, what that craves is your mind starts to crave having a clean mouth. As a result of the craving, you conduct the habit of brushing your teeth, and the reward you get from that is having fresh breath. Let's look at a trading-based example. Let's say you have a habit of revenge trading. Maybe the trigger is because you missed your last trade and you're now trading on tilt. You're not psychologically or mentally at neutral, and you're annoyed by missing your last trade. As a result of that certain trigger, you're now craving wanting to be in the market. This leads you to revenge trade or take trades outside of your plan, and the reward you get from that is you get to be in the market exactly like you wanted. Let's look at the habit of smoking. For a lot of people, the initial trigger can sometimes just be boredom. And in this scenario, I've said boredom at work. Now, when you're bored at work, what do you crave? You crave a break. What's the easiest way to go on a break? You go out to smoke. And the reward you get from that is obviously having the temporary break away from your desk. So again, these are just a few examples to help demonstrate the idea of how the habit loop works. It's a 4-stage process: trigger, craving, habit, and reward. And the most important thing that we could do at this stage is start to understand that every single one of our habits, whether it's our thoughts, whether it's our actions, they can be broken down into this 4-stage process. Now, let me explain what most people do wrong when they start to look at changing, creating, breaking, or manipulating their habits. Now, when most people think about their habits, they focus on the habit itself. So in the prior example where we talked about maybe the act of brushing your teeth, if somebody wanted to change that routine in any way, they would simply focus on the act of brushing their teeth, the actual action. If they wanted to change something, they are going to focus entirely on the action. Now, the reason why this doesn't work is usually by the time you're aware of the action taking place, because habits usually happen automatic and unconsciously, it's too late. You're in the middle of the action, or you're craving something so bad that it's too late to turn back. On top of that, in most cases, you don't actually want the action, you want the reward. So in that example, when you actually are looking to brush your teeth, it's not because you actually enjoy the process of brushing your teeth. For most people, you actually enjoy the feeling of having fresh breath. So to give you another couple of examples, maybe you don't want the cookie that you see on the table. What you actually want is the good feeling and the delicious taste that the cookie gives you. Maybe you don't actually want to binge watch Netflix at the end of a day. Maybe what you want is actually just to be able to unwind and let your mind calm after a long day. So what are we going to start doing differently? So now that we understand that all of our habits can be broken down into a 4-stage process, what I want you to do is to start focusing on triggers and rewards. So once you can identify what your trigger is and understand the reward you get from any habit, manipulating this habit becomes far easier. Now, just to reiterate, most people focus on the action. They focus on the habit, the actual routine itself. And that's wrong. And I'm going to demonstrate exactly why. What we are going to start doing is focusing on identifying the trigger and what the potential reward is from this habit. So, why is this important? Well, if you want to break a habit, what you're not going to do is start to try and fight the action itself. To break a habit, what we're going to be focusing on is either eliminating the trigger, or we're going to be finding a different action to get the same reward. On the flip side, if we wanted to create a habit, all you're going to do is focus on finding a suitable trigger and then make the entire process rewarding. So can you see what we're doing here? we are focusing on triggers and rewards. We're not focusing on the action itself. If you learn to either eliminate or create a very good trigger, that is either the start or the complete end to any routine kicking off. If you learn what the reward is that you're getting from something, you can actually figure out a different way to get the same reward. So a lot of the times, and one of the easiest examples I give people when it comes to trading is that most people actually tend to trade because they are bored. And actually what you want to do is not to put a trade on or a position on in the market out of boredom. What you need to do is find something to occupy your time. So this is another way to get a reward from finding something stimulating for your mind to do instead of looking at charts. That is not going to come from putting on a position outside of your plan. So I want to touch on the idea of consistency being greater than intensity. What we want to do here is focus on making every process as easy as possible so we can be consistent with our actions. And this is actually the way 90% of our routines are formed, through consistency and not intensity. This is a really important concept to understand when it comes to creating new routines, because what most people tend to do is they try and be as intense as possible. But what you should be doing is focusing on being as consistent as possible. Let me give you an example. Let's say you are someone that wants to start a new exercise routine. Well, most people start by saying, right, I'm going to work out 2 hours a day, every day, 5 days a week till the end of the year. And for some people that actually work out regularly, that might be normal for them. But actually, if you don't do any exercise, that is the last thing you want to do. What you want to do is probably focusing on working out 5 minutes a day, every day for 7 days for the next 1 year. Whilst that doesn't sound like it would be rewarding in terms of your physical or mental health, what the consistency of doing that action every single day will give you is actually the habit that you are looking for. Now, once you have become consistent over time, you can start to up the intensity, but every single one of the routines that we are going to create are all framed on the idea of consistency. Now, lastly, when it comes to habits, I want you to understand that there is often an inverse relationship between good and bad habits. Good habits often feel bad in the moment, but they are good for you in the long run. Think about going to the gym, for example. Feels bad in the moment, but next week, your body will be thankful for it. And the inverse is also true. Bad habits often feel good in the moment, but they are bad for you in the long run. Think about binge eating junk food. Feels great at the time. You go on to regret it probably a few hours later. Now, how does this apply to your trading? Now, what I want you to do is to start thinking about how all your routines, whether physical or mental, break down into this habit loop. I want you to be able to define your trigger, your craving, your action, and your reward. Let's go through an example. Let's look at FOMO, the infamous routine that we all tend to fall into. And it causes us typically to get into a trade far too early. Now, whilst most people are going to be focusing on changing the action of getting in early, what we want to identify is the full habit loop here. And it may look something like this. The trigger before FOMO actually kicks in may have been missing a previous trade. The craving this sets off is that your mind wants to partake in the action because, as we discussed, your mind is simply trying to protect you from not having the pain of a lost or missed trade over and over again. The result is you end up getting into a trade early or chasing a market or breaking your plan. And in this instance, you're rewarded by being involved in the action that you crave. Now, we must focus mostly on our triggers and rewards, as I mentioned. And often this can be one of the most difficult and complex parts to this, because identifying both of these things it's not a straightforward process. But I want you to really sit down, and the more you do this exercise and you think of your habits, whether again that's your actions or the way in which you think on a day-to-day basis, the more you focus on this, the better you will be at figuring out which stages fall in and create your own habit loop. Now, once you know these, you can start to put a plan in place to show you how you can proactively start to do something different. Now, I want to offer some help and advice on this in terms of helping to find your triggers. Now, once you've identified a pattern of thought or behavior which you commonly experience, to help you identify your triggers, I want you to answer the following questions each time you experience it to figure out what your trigger is. Where are you? What time is it? Who else is around? What is your emotional state? And what action preceded the urge? So these 5 questions are going to help you to identify the trigger that starts off your entire routine. And again, this doesn't just apply to trading. This could be for any aspect of your life. And actually, any of these could be the reason behind making your mistakes in trading. But typically, in my experience, the 2 main questions to identify your triggers are usually the latter. What is your emotional state? And what action preceded the urge? So anytime you find yourself doing something over and over again over an extended period of time which is having a detriment to your account, ask yourself, what is my emotional state? Or what happened just before I had the urge to take some kind of action? Because I promise you, the way you defeat those bad patterns, the way you defeat FOMO, it's not about trying to fight the emotion once it's already taken place. You need to identify when FOMO is about to occur before it happens. And this is where I move on to the idea of being proactive versus reactive. Now, the purpose of identifying your triggers is to become aware of what is going to happen before the action actually takes place. Once you can identify this, this is no longer a case of firefighting your actions when they happen. You can proactively start to avoid these before they happen because you can anticipate, if I miss a trade, if I mismanage something, if I take a loss, I am typically not mentally neutral and I will end up doing something that is going to cause a detriment to my account. Now, if I know that pattern exists, I can now start to do something differently, which is going to allow me to change the outcome of what happens in my outside world. It all starts and it all ends with the habit loop. And again, this is what I would say like 95% of people are doing wrong when it comes to trying to change their actions or trying to change their thoughts. So as a final exercise, and again, yes, we have another exercise. I want you to keep a log of your thoughts and actions throughout the day. I want you to start to identify the patterns in your thoughts and actions by the things that you repeat each day. Once you've identified a common habit, I want you to break this down into the 4 stages of the habit loop. And again, if you're struggling to identify what your triggers are, go back and use the 5 questions to identify what those triggers are. So the goal and the reason for this exercise, and I would almost argue that this is one of the most important exercises in this course, is I want you to become so familiar with this concept that you can start to break down your routines into this process almost automatically. And the more you practice doing this with both your day-to-day routines, the easier it's going to be for you to do this in your trading. So I did warn you, it was quite a chunky section, but I promise you the habit loop, if you can adopt this process and bring it into your day-to-day life, it will be one of the concepts which helps you transform your trading, because it really and truly unpacks what it means to change, break, create, manipulate your thoughts, your actions, and anything that is causing a detriment to your account. And what you really want to be doing with this exercise here is working out which thoughts and which actions are limiting your trading, and then identifying what thoughts and what actions are going to be a benefit to your trading. And you're going to be breaking the old patterns and you're going to be instilling entirely new ones. Creating a good process. Finally, I briefly want to go over some important concepts which you should keep in mind and I want you to include as part of your trading process. Simply put, a good process is designed to allow you to make more decisions with logic behind them rather than emotion. And that means using system 2 versus system 1. Your trading process should not only document how you get in and out of the market as per the hybrid strategy, but it should define what you do in certain situations and when it might be best to walk away based on the patterns of behavior and thoughts that you've just identified using the habit loop. Now, the purpose of following a guideline of processes is to slow down your actions to ensure that you're giving your mind the best chance of making actions with system 2 rather than system 1. And I know there is a big push to have checklists, a framework before getting into every trade. And the idea is you want to take emotion out of this process. You only want to have logical, rational, defined actions. And you can do that by having a very clear-cut process. These are all the things which go into giving you a good process. The next thing I want to discuss is money is not the reward. Now, we mentioned this in our first section. I want to talk a little bit about the habit loop, and typically our minds don't actually care about the actions. They drive towards rewards. I mentioned this in section 1, and I mentioned the importance of identifying our rewards when we went through the last section in the habit loop. Now, in embracing the idea of the market being an uncertain place, as we mentioned at the start, we need to understand that we shouldn't view our profits as a reward. Our rewards must be based on following our strategy, as this is the only thing that we have control over. If you do this well and you trade with an effective edge, money will simply become a byproduct of following your strategy. It's important to remember that trading is a marathon. Trading is best viewed this way, and you don't want to look at it like a sprint. No one trade is ever going to make you rich overnight, and no one loss is going to blow your account. You want to take each position with the long game in mind. Mental capital versus financial capital. I want you to understand that with every trade that you put on, you are risking both financial capital and mental capital. And your mental energy needs to be preserved as the highest priority, as this can often be a deciding factor in what happens in the long run of your trading. The 3 outcomes of any trade. So I live by a philosophy that there should only ever be 3 outcomes of any given position. It should either be a small loss, it should be a small win, or a big win. If you can eliminate ever taking a big loss and you learn to manage risk well, your chances of success as a trader increase exponentially. The 3 elements of a consistent trader. I believe these are someone that learns from the past. I believe it is someone that plans for the future. But I also believe it is someone that trades in the present moment. And where I believe most people struggle is I believe most traders are haunted by the past. I believe most traders don't make a plan for the future. And I believe as a result of both of those things, most traders don't trade in the present moment. They're either trading based on their fears of the past or anxiety of the future. This is something to be aware of and something that we want to be doing differently. As a final exercise, I want you to reflect over the diary that you keep when you start to understand the habit loop. So your exercise during that section was to break down your day-to-day thoughts and actions into the 4 stages of the habit loop: trigger, craving, habit, and reward. Now, when you reflect over this, I want you to document as part of your process what you can start to do proactively to avoid this and these mistakes in the future. So for example, I would say a good process understands that when you miss a trade or you get stopped out by a single point or something happens, that is typically a trigger for you. It is going to lead to you having a certain craving, and it is typically going to cause you to take a revenge trade, or it's typically going to cause you to double up on your position size, or it may typically cause you to end up breaking your plan. When you can identify that those patterns exist, you can now start to document as part of your process. Dear self, typically if I get stopped out by 1 point and the market reverses, that is a bad trigger for me. If that happens, the first thing I should do is walk away and not come back to my desk until tomorrow. That for me is a trader that is super aware of the issues that we face, both in our mind, but also aware of the patterns of our thoughts and behavior and the issues they can cause in terms of us becoming successful traders. That is the end of section 2. I hope you've enjoyed that. Again, I understand it was quite a lot of information, and again, I would encourage you to please go back over these sections as many times as you need. Please, again, take notes, and I would highly encourage everyone to be really serious about doing the exercises, because as I mentioned, as part of what we need to learn through habits, consistency is much greater than intensity. The more you can be consistent with these practices, these exercises, the more you will ingrain your brain to start thinking differently from 90% of the people. And as we know, most of the statistics show 90% of traders lose money. And that is because not enough people are focusing on their mindset, and they're not focusing on the typical habits, the typical thoughts that we have on a day-to-day basis, which end up being detrimental to our trading. So again, I hope you've enjoyed this section. I hope you found it insightful. And I look forward to wrapping this course up in our third and final section. See you there.